Hello, and welcome to today's webinar on the NITC-funded research, Segmenting the Market for Transportation Demand Management Campaigns. I'm Lisa Patterson, and I will be your moderator for today. I'm the Tech Transfer and Workforce Development Program Manager for TREC, the Transportation Research and Education Center at Portland State University. TREC leads the federally funded University Transportation Center, NITC, the National Institute for Transportation and Communities. NITC is one of 5 national centers across the U.S., and our research focus is on improving mobility for people and goods to build strong communities. This Portland State-led partnership includes the University of Oregon, Oregon Institute of Technology, University of Utah, University of Arizona, and University of Texas at Arlington. Our webinars are based on original research conducted by faculty, researchers, and students at these NITC partner universities. Our goal for these webinars is to get useful research results into the hands of practitioners, academics, and other stakeholders like yourselves. All right. Our speakers today are Philip Winters and Amy Lester from the University of South Florida's Center for Urban Transportation Research. Philip Winters is the Director of Transportation Demand Management Program at the Center for Urban Transportation Research at the University of South Florida. He has nearly 38 years experience in TDM, including 10 years managing a regional TDM program in Virginia and over 25 years at Qatar, in conducting research and providing training and technical assistance. He's an emeritus member of the Committee on TDM of the Transportation Research Board. Phil also received the prestigious Association for Commuter Transportation's Bob Owens TDM Champion Award in 2007. Amy Lester is a faculty research associate at the Center for Urban Transportation Research, or Qatar, at University of South Florida. Dr. Lester earned her PhD in public health, concentrating on social marketing in 2014 from the University of South Florida College of Public Health. Dr. Lester holds additional undergraduate and graduate degrees in public health, anthropology, and biomedical sciences. Dr. Lester has strong methodological expertise, and her research interests focus on qualitative formative research, social marketing, social determinants of health, and program evaluation. In addition to research, Dr. Lester has extensive teaching experience at both the college and high school levels. All right, before diving into the webinar, I just wanted to give you an update on a couple upcoming events. We have our last Friday transportation seminar this Friday with Larry Head from University of Arizona, for this year, I should say. He will be presenting on connected vehicle technology platforms, and you can watch the Friday seminar series online. And our next webinar is Thursday, January 24th with Terry Wang from University of Utah, and he'll be presenting his research on vehicle sensor data-based traffic control in connected automated vehicle environments. To find more information about those events or to register, you can see our full schedule of upcoming events online at trec.pdx.edu/events. All right, and lastly, before I hand it over to Phil and Amy, I just wanted to give you an overview of the webinar. Phil and Amy will present for about 40 minutes, and during this time, you can submit questions, which will be answered at the end of the webinar. We will be recording today's webinar, and we'll make it available on our website. We'll also you'll send an email post-webinar with the video recording and presentation slides in the next day or two. And finally, if you're tracking professional development hours, this webinar is eligible for 1 hour of continuing education credit. Instructions on how to redeem the credit will also be included in your post-webinar email. All right. During the presentation, you may submit questions for Phil and Amy by using the questions pane on your control panel. We will track questions and they will respond to them at the end of the webinar. If we run out of time, we will send out written responses for any questions left unanswered. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Phil and Amy.
Great, and thank you, Lisa. So good morning, everyone. Today we are presenting our segment project. Just quickly, this is a brief overview of what we will be covering today. So we will talk about the purpose of market segmentation. We're going to go over a little bit about the Europe segment project methods and results, which this research was modeled after. We're going to talk about our segment project, the methods and results. We're going to demonstrate the spreadsheet tool that we created to help identify which segment different people belong to. And we're also going to discuss some of the implementation results from Europe and show different ways in which this tool and this research can be used as well. And then we'll leave time for questions and answers at the end. So first, we're going to briefly go over why we use a segmentation approach. So the purpose of our study was to explore a consumer market segmentation technique that was developed and successfully used in Europe for mobility management campaigns aimed at changing travel behavior. And we were looking at its usefulness to transportation demand management campaigns here in the US. So of particular relevance to influencing behavior is this need to segment an audience and target measures accordingly. And segmentation refers to dividing a market into groups of customers to develop different products, services, and communications to meet their specific needs, and then to focus resources on those segments that have the greatest potential for change. And we've seen several studies that have shown that not only do distinct market segments exist, but they have differential responses to marketing programs and messages. So it's very important to, when we're looking at an entire audience, to break it up into smaller pieces and then develop those specific strategies for each of those different target groups. So the benefit of using a market segmentation approach, again, is to develop better target messages that resonate with a segment, develop augmented products that appeal to the segment's changing travel behavior, and utilize our resources effectively when encouraging travel behavior change. And groups of users can often be differentiated based on their personal travel behaviors and characteristics and attitudes, which is what we did in this study. So some of the benefits, again, the act of just thinking about target groups itself makes a difference to the way in which our TDM campaigns are designed, even before any data is collected. Just the act of thinking about different target groups and their specific needs and lifestyle characteristics help aid that creative dialogue around the initiatives and key message that will be developed for the campaign. Also, the collection of rich contextual data often adds new insightful information to existing knowledge about what the current mobility patterns are and public perceptions and motivations. Improvements can be targeted not just at a single segment, but they could improve the experience of other groups as well. So thus, helping influence behaviors among different users. So although strategies are often tailored to one specific segment, it generally has a much larger impact on the other groups as well. And then finally, segmentation helps us develop policy recommendations that reach further than policies directed at a single cluster. Again, just because we're focusing on a specific segment, generally the policies that are developed and the strategies that are developed reach further past those other segments. So again, this research was modeled after the European Segment Project with the aim of creating a segmentation model to be used by the entire United States. So the European Segment Project was developed to be a replicable and transferable market segmentation model to be used by all of the EU's 27 member states when they're designing campaigns to persuade people to change their travel behavior and adopt more energy efficient forms of transport. So the Segment Project analyzed over 10,000 comprehensive attitudinal surveys that contained over 100 questions to generate 8 main attitudinal segments that were useful for designing their mobility campaigns. And then additional analysis that they conducted produced 18 golden questions from the initial 100 plus questions. And those represent the smallest number of survey questions required to produce the 8 market segments. And a short list of golden questions is very beneficial to quickly and accurately place individuals into segments, rather than having to have people take the entire 100 plus question survey. Just using this small number of questions helps, because these questions can then be inserted into other surveys and things to quickly segment people. So these were the 8 attitudinal segments that were produced by the European project. So first was devoted drivers that were not convinced that other modes are realistic alternatives and therefore primarily used their cars for travel. Their second group that they came up with was the image improvers, who did not want any restrictions on driving, nonetheless somewhat concerned for the environment. They found a group that they called malcontent motorists who found driving stressful and desired the reduction of car use, but found the alternatives not practical for their travel needs. They had a group of active aspirers who were motivated by environmental awareness and prefer walking and cycling to public transportation and short trips when trying to reduce car use. They also had a group called practical travelers, which use cars for efficiency and practicality and had little tendency to change their habits. And then there were also, so these were our driver groups, and then there were also groups of non-drivers. So their groups for non-drivers include car contemplators who aspired to be car owners, desiring the freedom and independence driving offers. The second non-driver group was public transport dependents that were not anti-car mode. They had little interest in environmental issues and were frustrated with transit service. And then the car-free choosers were conscientiously using healthy modes of transportation, deeply concerned about environmental issues. So again, these were the 8 attitudinal segments found in the European project. And then shortly we'll talk about the segments we found in the US. And then lastly, for the European project, so they did conclude that most of their 8 segments can be detected in all the locations. However, the proportion to which each segment is represented in each city differs, and we'll show some of our results for the US as well. So this slide displays the golden questions from the US. You'll see the first question that people are presented with is, have you driven a car or van in the past 12 months? And then based on their response to that question, if they answered yes, they received questions 2 through 5. If they answered no, they were presented with question 6. And then after those questions, then both groups received questions 7 through 18. And again, they found through their analysis that this was the smallest subset of questions from that larger 100+ survey. These questions most accurately predicted that segment fit into one of those 8 segments. Okay, so again, this research was modeled after the European project with the aim of creating a segmentation model to be used by the entire US. And the 8 segments and goal and questions identified by the European segment, we felt like couldn't be directly transferable to the United States without further analysis. For things such as differing driving practices, there's cultural differences, there's a lot of policy differences between the US and Europe. So we really sought to answer the questions, are our market segments the same in US as they were in Europe? And then are the golden questions used in Europe able to accurately predict segment orientation in the United States, or are we going to be using different questions? So the study, we did utilize the same set of survey questions used by the European segment project, and these questions came from the Healthcare Facilities Questionnaire conducted in the London Borough of Hounslow. And we did make adjustments for differences for the metric system. So we changed the questions based on the metric system to the US. And then the other major difference between this study and the European segment project is, if you remember on the previous slide where it asked, the European project asked if they had driven in the past 12 months. So instead of asking, have you driven in the past 12 months, we asked how frequently people drove. And then we grouped people that had driven less than 1 day per week. We classified those as non-drivers in the US. So whereas in Europe, if they had responded that no, they had never driven in the last 12 months, they were non-drivers, we felt like in the US, we could still classify people as non-drivers if they drive very infrequently, which again defined as less than 1 day per week. We did use a Qualtrics online survey, so we used panel data using Qualtrics. And then most questions on the survey inquired about participants' attitudes towards different modes of travel and were scored on a Likert scale from 1 to 5, strongly disagree to strongly agree. And then in addition to the European questions, we did add 22 additional questions that we thought would better separate the segments based on US travel patterns. So we added in questions related to things like Uber, Lyft, and telework, and some of the some of the other things, some of the other travel patterns that we're seeing here in the US. And of those 22 questions, 6 were given to drivers, and then the other 16 were given to both drivers and non-drivers. Okay, so data was collected from nearly 1,900 individuals in the 3 states of Florida, Oregon, and Virginia. And we chose those 3 states based on just their varying structure of, their infrastructure, the travel patterns. So we tried to choose just 3 very different states. Participants were required to be 18 years or older. They had to be employed either part-time or full-time, because we were looking primarily at commuters. They also, one of the limitations is that participants did not have any physical or mental disability that prohibits them from driving or traveling independently for the purposes of the survey. And additionally, quotas were placed on the data to match the demographics of commuters in the United States. So things such as age groups and gender that we see from our demographics of the entire US commuter population. So a total of almost 1,900 responses were recorded, and that breaks down to there were 651 respondents from Florida, 627 from Oregon, and 631 from Virginia. And again, the data was, there were quotas placed on the data to match the demographics of commuters in the entire US. So matching those demographics, we had about 13.2% under 25 years old, almost 45% were in the 25 to 44 age range, and then about another 44% were over 45. There are 53% male and 47% female. So 2 phases of analysis with identical steps and methodologies were carried out. The first phase used only those questions that were taken from the European questionnaire. And then the second phase, we duplicated those exact same methods. However, we added in our 22 additional questions. And by doing this, we were able to make observations about how similar the 2 populations were in the first phase, and then whether those additional questions would help better identify the US segments in the second phase. So we used clustering analysis to divide the sample into segments that members of the same group would share similar travel attitudes. And then next, a classification model using discriminant analysis was built to predict group membership. And we found that dividing the sample into 7 segments, so again, the European project had 8, and we found 7. We found 3 non-driver and 4 driver groups, which we'll present in just a moment. But that was found to be the most stable and distinctive segmentation in this sample. And then 17 questions that we refer to similarly to Europe as the golden questions were found to separate the segments most significantly, and they predicted that group membership with 84% accuracy. And we did find significant differences in age and household distribution between segments. And then the mean responses to those questions were used to create an attitudinal profile for each group. Okay, so as far as our non-driver segments, we did find 3 non-driver segments based on the data. So we had 3 groups. They're the open-minded and practical travelers. We found second group, the car-free choosers, and you'll note that this group was very consistent with the group found in Europe. And then we had the car contemplators, which again mirrored very closely one of the segments that was found in the European project. So our non-driver group, the open-minded and practical travelers, just a little bit of background on that group and what their attitudinal profile looks like. So this group somewhat likes driving or traveling by car, truck, or van. And they also believe that people should be allowed to use their cars, trucks, or vans as much as they'd like. However, they are also open-minded about other modes of transportation. They have positive attitudes towards walking and biking. They're aware of the health benefits. They understand that society is facing environmental problems, but they don't have a strong drive to act on the situation. For the car-free chooser group, again, the same as the European segment, this group does not feel the need to own a car, as they believe that public transportation, walking, and cycling are adequate for their daily life. They also think that owning a car is expensive and therefore do not have any incentive to invest in them, and they're unlikely to increase their driving frequency. However, they still do enjoy traveling as a passenger. And they also have positive attitudes towards many types of public transportation. They love walking and biking and strongly believe that these are healthy modes. They also pay a lot of attention to environmental problems, and they believe, in global warming, that it's not an exaggerated threat. And if this group does dislike any mode, it's most likely to be motorcycle. For our car contemplator group, again, the same as in Europe, this group loves traveling by car, truck, or van, whether they're driving or not. They do not like traveling by public transportation because they think it's slow and stressful. They believe that owning a car is a sign of success, and they provide status and prestige to its owner. And as a result, they feel that people should be allowed to drive as much as they would like. They don't really like biking or walking, but they are aware of the health benefits. And they're also aware of environmental problems, but they do not feel like they need to personally act to solve these problems. So those were our 3 non-driver groups. And then our project, we also found 4 driver groups. So we found a group that we named the malcontent motorists and non-bikers, and this group was very similar to the European group, malcontent motorists. A second group was the car lovers and devoted drivers, again, very similar to the European segment. Active aspirers, again, very similar to European segment, and then open-minded car lovers. So again, just a little bit of background on what types of attitudes we saw in our survey questions that helped form these profiles. So the malcontent motorists and non-bikers, this is a group that likes driving, but not as much as the car lovers and devoted drivers do. They agree that it's important to reduce the number of cars, trucks, and vans on the road because of odor and pollution, noise. They also feel responsible about environmental problems. And they somewhat believe that reducing car use can help stop climate change. Nevertheless, they don't enjoy public transportation because driving is faster, and they really don't have many options besides driving. And then a distinctive feature of this group is that they dislike bicycles and motorcycles. Even though they acknowledge the health benefits of bicycling, this is a group that's probably not going to be swayed towards riding a bicycle. Our car lovers and devoted drivers group is another group that really loves to drive. They don't want to cut down on their car use, and they believe that there's no realistic alternative to driving. They believe that driving is a way to express themselves, and they believe that people should be allowed to use their car as much as they like. They have very negative attitudes towards biking and walking, even though they understand the health benefits. And they also have very negative attitudes towards any kind of public transportation, just because they feel like driving a car is faster and cheaper. However, they do not think that they are too dependent on the car, and they also do not enjoy carpooling. They do not agree that cars create noise and odor nuisance or lead to an unhealthy lifestyle. For the active aspirers group, this group does not enjoy driving as much as people in the other groups, and they'd gladly cut down their car, truck, or van use if they could. They believe that driving is quicker, but not always cheaper than public transportation. And they don't really like traveling by taxi or motorcycle. They have positive attitudes towards different types of public transportation. They enjoy walking and biking, and they appreciate the health benefits, and they're highly aware of environmental responsibilities. And then if this group had to use a car to get to work, they would like to carpool. And then finally, our open-minded car lovers. This group really loves to drive and does not want to cut down on their car use, and they believe that there's no realistic alternative to driving. They strongly believe that people should be able to use their vehicle as much as they like, and since they believe that driving is cheaper and quicker, they have unfavorable attitudes towards public transportation. They do still like to travel by walking and biking, and they appreciate the health benefits. And despite their love for driving, this group does feel responsible about environmental issues. Therefore, they think that it is important to reduce the number of cars on the roadway. This group is also open to carpooling. So again, those were our 7 groups. I know that was just a very brief overview of each of the groups. There is a much longer explanation in our full report, but hopefully you start to see the differences in these groups and how different strategies could be developed for these different groups based on their different attitudes. And now I'm going to turn it over to Phil to talk a little bit more about the distribution of these segments that we found.
Thanks, Amy. I appreciate that. Yeah, we talk a little bit about the distribution. As Amy's indicated earlier, the European example showed that each of the cities where they implemented this had a slightly different distribution. And we found that that to be the same case here. Just if we just compared it, for example, at the state level, you see kind of a similar profile, if you will, with certainly the non-drivers or driver light, if you will, being under 5% for the most part. But if you look at, the various groups such as the open-minded car lovers, where here in Florida, that was our largest share, but in Virginia, the largest share was the malcontented drivers. You get an idea of the distribution among them. And that gives you an idea that not necessarily which group you might want to target or pursue might be slightly different depending where you're at. And again, looking at Oregon versus Florida on the active aspirers, Oregon has the green bar, if you will, has a lot more active aspirers percentage-wise than Florida. So now what we did too is, now that's just the profile of the general public. One thing we did kind of as a result of this project, we took the results and as part of another project we had here in Florida, funded by the Florida Department of Transportation, which was an evaluation of what we call commuter assistance programs, or CAPS. Now the cities up at the top, Sarasota, Tallahassee, Pensacola, are just by the name, represent multi-county area for the Florida DOT districts. And Miami, Fort Lauderdale actually represents 2 districts. But we asked as part of the evaluation, we asked their current customers these golden questions and then came back with a profile of who they are currently serving. And so you can get a fair idea of looking, for example, comparing Miami, Fort Lauderdale area to Orlando, Daytona area on the car-free choosers. You're looking at, remember the car-free choosers are folks that, certainly among other things, like transit. You look at that, that's a high percentage, much higher percentage in Miami and Fort Lauderdale. Now, clearly, depending on who you go after, there's really no one size fits all in terms of trying to approach all these groups. And that, as Amy's indicated earlier, I guess I kind of describe this. Imagine you're trying to interest a 10-year-old in a hobby like cooking. Now how you approach that 10-year-old child would be different than how you would approach a grandmother about cooking. It's the same product, if you will, or the same service, if you will, but how you would approach them will be different. And that's, I think, what we're trying to get at with a lot of these segments. Now we integrated these segment questions as part of the CAP evaluation here, and that showed the different profiles within that. Now, the expectation is the commuter assistance program would look at this and kind of go, okay, which groups are we targeting? Which groups do we want to be targeting? And as a result of that, design campaigns and products or augmented products or augmented services to help address the needs of somebody in that specific segment profile. And who they are tracked right now could also be a subject of their current messaging and current product offering, and even outreach strategies of who they go after. We also included the far right column is the distribution. is the distribution of those 100 or so folks that completed it prior to the webinar, the link we sent out, that NITC sent out to you all. Thank you for participating. And you can see there that there are really two large groups. The one at the bottom, active aspirers, if you think about that, that it kind of makes sense of this type of industry, the type of people that are interested in trying to encourage people to use alternatives, say, to driving alone or driving in the peak hour congestion. I mean, the people there in active aspire, again, are those who approve of bicycling, appreciate bicycle benefits. They're neutral to positive to transit, and they recognize how important it is to reduce traffic. That probably does a fair good description of what many of our jobs are associated with that. So that's who here is at the attendee. Now, if you look at that 61% and look at, go back to the previous slide and look, you're looking at about 16% of the general population in Florida, for example, had a active aspirer profile. So if we were trying to target to ourselves, we would only be attracting or communicating with about 16%. Now here, this is a similar structure. Again, as Amy explained, the non-driver issue, we did it as once or less, put you in the non-driver, or you could also call it driver light, I suppose. Those are the golden questions on the left, and then on the right side are those that drive more than once a week, which we would call the driver group. And then there are 3 shared questions at the bottom that are asked to all both groups. We'll go over these and I'll give you another look at these too. Now, a comparison, what we're looking here is if you look in the gold shaded, or the ones with the double asterisks, are the new questions that we added and to help predict the non-driver group. The ones that are not highlighted at all or not asterisked at all are those that were in the original European one as well. And the ones with the star are the ones from the European golden questions. And then the others are questions that were asked in both. For drivers, the same sort of thing. You can see here there are more European golden questions, the ones with a single asterisk, the yellowish bars. The goldish bars are the new questions that we added. So things like, I'd rather be a carpool passenger, for example, was not asked in Europe. So it's kind of a mix. And again, a similar number of golden questions were asked in both. Amy?
Okay, thanks, Phil. So again, as Phil mentioned, in this study, we did find a unique set of questions that most accurately predict segment membership in the United States. So seeing those gold questions on the previous page, those were from our additional questions that we added just based on this project. So we did find that a lot of times our added questions were better able to predict segment membership than the original European questions. So we did find a unique set. So some of the significance of this is that transportation agencies, and as we saw in Florida with our commuter assistance program, so we can easily add these golden questions to our existing surveys to gather information about the proportion of individuals that belong to segments in the area, or just among their current customer base. And then through this study, we also found that the proportion of individuals belonging to each segment varied considerably, both by state and then, as we saw with the CAP evaluation, within state as well, which is very consistent with other segmentation studies. So, this really shows how significant it is for local transportation agencies and programs to investigate, what's the proportion of their community members that belong to each segment. So rather than just using a one-size-fits-all approach, really looking at, what's the distribution within your local community, using these, small set of golden questions to determine what that proportion is, and then designing effective programs based on, each of those segments. So additionally, we find that limited resources can be much better allocated now to target those segments that are more susceptible to behavior change. So just when I was going over the different segment profiles, I'm sure as I was describing each of those segments, it was very easy to start to think about, okay, well, that would be a great segment to target for a bicycling campaign, whereas that segment, just is not going to be one that's going to move. So these results really then allow our programs to develop targeted messages that resonate with and match the behaviors of a particular segment. So either things that they're already doing or things that they have positive attitudes towards. And then we can also develop products that augment the desired behavior or travel behavior or desired products, such as maybe changes to an emergency ride home program to allow use for travel to work for carpool riders, or maybe providing occasional use parking permits for transit riders. But again, looking at these segments and what their different attitudes are, we can start to think about how we can design our products and services to better fit them. We also find the golden questions, they should reduce the cost and if not the need completely for custom segmentation studies. So again, using the small set of questions which can be inserted into existing surveys to really understand what the demographic profile is, based on attitudes of our, of our communities. Markets can be segmented based on individual ability and willingness to change current behavior rather than, again, solely based on sociodemographics and geography. So many times we see segmentation based on just sociodemographics, male, female, age ranges, or geography. So this, this segmentation approach really allows us to look deeper into the attitudes, the current behaviors, those more of those psychodemographics that help us better differentiate groups of people. So we did develop an Excel tool for this project, which allows users to identify individual segment membership based on the responses to golden questions. And Phil's now going to demonstrate how to use this tool that's created and is available for everybody on the NITC website.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Yeah, we'll do a very quick assessment. And this is also a way for those that have participated and wanted to know what category or segment that they fell into. You could download this sheet itself and use it yourself and answer the questions. So there are a variety of different tabs, as you might expect. The first tab provides the instructions. It should be rather straightforward. The second tab discusses the golden questions, again, the ones we've just covered, and to remind you which ones we use to predict which market segment you might fall into. There is the preliminary question. Sorry, it should go here. So here the golden questions, both on non-driver and the driver, the 16 and 15 questions, and what the scales, the answer choices were. The next tab over was the preliminary question. Then this is where you would try to sort out which of these respondents, based on how they responded to the preliminary question about their frequency of having used a car, truck, or van as a driver. And you can see on the far right, they get automatically classified based on the drop-down message. So if let's just drop down to the bottom here. So if I go ahead and I picked about one day per week, automatically this person gets classified as a driver, and you would use the driver segmentation tool versus the next tab, which is the non-driver segmentation. The questions are on the second row here, so it's basically again all drop down. So in this case it's agree. We would change that to disagree, and as you can see, as you continue to the right for all the questions, it will automatically classify which segment they are in as a result of this. And the non-driver segments, same sort of thing. The questions are different, of course. There are a few similarities, but the same sort of thing is that you enter across, it comes to the far right column, and they get classified as one of the 4 drivers segments. I would point out that one of the if you're doing multiple large scale, like here, this screen, anyway, this was an excerpt from our Qualtrics where we collected the data from the attendees here at today's webinar and how their answers. And as you look across, they automatically get populated. You can take these and extract the data and just copy and paste it into these tabs, and it will classify groups of them at one time. And this is what we did, for example, for the Florida Commuter Assistance Programs. Other tabs include the segment descriptions that Amy just went over, so if it makes it easy to refer back to. We have hidden tabs, including the discriminant functions and the coefficients. So if you wanted to look at those, they're not, they can be unhidden. They're also, all the tabs are protected with a password, but the password is up on in the workbook instructions. That's kind of just a catch-all that you didn't do something that broke it. But at the same point, if you wanted to modify the layout a little bit, for example, or run cross tabs on how many of certain types or frequency counts, you have that ability to do. No.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. I'll try to get it back. I don't know why it keeps doing this.
Okay. Okay, well, while we're getting the PowerPoint going again, the last thing that we wanted to go over today is, again, this research is very new. We haven't had a chance to implement and design campaigns, of course, based on our segments yet, but we wanted to share some of the results from the European project just to show what kinds of, what kinds of possibilities there are based on this type of research. So the first campaign that I'm going to share is a campaign that was conducted in Poland for new employees. And again, this was based on their segment research. So, and they chose seven different cities and states to evaluate whether or not campaigns based on these segments would be effective. So one of those chosen cities was in Poland, and they were looking at new employees. And they were trying to get new employees to cycle more often when they were traveling to work. So they looked at, again, they had 8 different segments, and they chose 3 different segments to focus on. They looked at a segment they called status seekers, which made up 14% of their population, reluctant pragmatists, which was 13% of the population, and car contemplators, which was 15%. So new employees, again, were encouraged to change their travel behavior and cycle more often when traveling to work. And the aim of the campaign was really to make these employees feel happy about themselves when not using a car and show that they can express themselves by riding a bike. So the survey of new employees that asked questions about their travel behavior and attitudes to different modes allowed them to designate the segments of employees with similar behaviors. So again, the status seekers and reluctant pragmatists, they grouped them into one group, and they said common characteristics between these first 2 groups were that they work full-time, they consider the car as a symbol of success, they do not see themselves in public transport, but they do consider cycling as an alternative. And this allowed for the creation of the campaign directed specifically for them, aiming to make them feel happy about themselves when not using a car and a way to express themselves. So some of the initiatives, that first bullet under initiatives is for those first 2 groups. So they did things like they had a competition for new employees where new employees had to cycle at least twice a week to get a sandwich or a snack every Monday and Friday morning. And then when they cycled at least 15 times, they received tickets to the cinema. And there were 3 winners chosen, and that chose their own prize, like a new bicycle or accessories. They also provide company bicycles branded with the project logo for new employees. They had free bicycle service. So for employees who declared that they would cycle to work, they were able to have their bike serviced by a professional service twice during this campaign period. They had 20 bikes with positive, catchy, and rhyming messages parked outside the companies that took part in the campaign. And they also had decorated bicycles standing outside companies to show that bicycles can be attractive. And that's that image of the purple bicycle down at the bottom. They also had a poster campaign that showed, for example, happy people riding a bicycle. The poster on this slide, the headline says, "He goes to work by bike," and the fine print says, "Our company participates in the program promoting cycling to work. Participants of the program receive free bicycle services and interesting prizes." And then for the car contemplators, they had a separate campaign for them. And these are the people that currently do not own a vehicle. So for their part of the campaign, they received certificates with the slogan, "Forget about a car, now a bus, trolley, or rapid railway is in vogue." And they were given as a kind of reward and symbol of appreciation for using public transport. And then additional to this, they received Starbucks gift cards for new employees who had a monthly ticket for public transportation. So you'll see that, again, based on those segments, they developed very different campaigns, specifically targeting some of the attitudes and behaviors and, things that would resonate with those groups. So some of the results, they had 220 people participate in the campaign. They saw that car driving decreased by 12%, cycling increased by 3%, walking by 1%, and then public transport also increased by 6%. So just a good example of how using those different segments and creating initiatives and strategies for them was very successful in this city. And then we'll go over maybe one more. So another example was in the London Borough of Hounslow. They had the My Time Schools campaign. And this was the most successful of all the school campaigns that were developed based on the segment project at Achieving Transport Mode Shift. So this campaign focused on the image improvers, and they found in their city they made up 20% of the parents that transported their kids to school. And this segment they found was motivated by being social, having fun, and being rewarded, like driving they weren't responsive to environmental messages. They do not like cycling. They consider walking to be easier than taking the car for some trips, and they find walking enjoyable, and they are motivated by health benefits. So those were some of the descriptions of that segment. So this campaign was targeted at parents with children starting at a new school. So it was a life change moment where parents are likely to review their travel choices. And then from the surveys that they completed with these new parents, they found that parents were very motivated by time and health. And they recognize that parents are ultimately the decision makers when it comes to choosing a travel mode. Therefore, as well as highlighting the health benefits of walking and cycling, the campaign focused on promoting active journey as a way for parents to spend more quality time with their children. And this campaign was a little different than some traditional campaigns because it rewarded parents, not the kids. So rewards were in the form of vouchers to fitness and gym classes and local swimming lessons for the adults. And then also for they could bring their children. And then also a parent who logged the most kilometers also won shopping vouchers. And the school that logged the most kilometers was awarded with 10 scooters. So, again, this entire campaign was developed based just on that group, the image improvers. And then surprisingly, results showed that overall, so amongst the entire schools that participated, walking increased by 6%. But in that segment alone, walking increased by 51% and car use decreased by 39%. So I think this is a good example showing that how by targeting one segment, that doesn't mean that you're excluding the other segments, because these campaigns have an effect on other people as well. As they see more people engaging in behavior, the social norms start to change. And however, it also shows that how well they did at targeting that segment. I mean, what a change they saw that walking increased by 51% and car usage decreased by so much just in this group. They also found, in other groups as well, for instance, the malcontent motorists, they increased walking by 27% and car contemplators by 57%. So these two groups weren't targeted at all, but they had a shared interest in walking for health and fitness, so the campaign also appealed to them. So just a really good example of how, the strategies can diffuse amongst some of the other segments as well.
Right. Why don't we stop for questions, Amy?
Sure.
And Lisa. And I should have said in the very beginning, too, that this project was funded under NITC. And I'll also give due credit to our graduate assistant, Min Pham, who was instrumental in a lot of the data analysis.
Great. Thank you, Phil and Amy. Really great presentation. We got quite a few questions already, but if for those of you viewing the webinar, if you still have questions, feel free to continue to submit them. All right, and so we'll go ahead and start with some questions that we already have queued up. There was a question about the survey, and as Phil had mentioned, we will be sharing the survey. It will be available on our website, and after the webinar, we will be sending out the video recording and slides. All right. Aside from the commuter travel, did you look at any other types of travel, such as recreation, travel, or visitation?
No, our focus was on the commuter travel, and that's what we used to collect the data. That was one of the requirements, as you may recall, of collecting the data through our Qualtrics surveys.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But that's a potential opportunity in the future. But
okay. And was it determined that questions about transport decisions based on health, practicality, or ease of use were not among the golden questions? It seems like the focus was more on environmental issues.
So we did use the questions that were originally conducted in Europe, and their survey was actually, it wasn't developed specifically for this purpose. It was developed actually to look at how people travel to arrive at healthcare appointments. So there were some questions related to health in there. However, based on the analysis, they didn't make it into the final set of golden questions. If in the report, it does list all of the questions that were used with our sample to determine what those final questions were. So there were some questions in there. However, again, they just didn't make it into that final set of questions.
Mm-hmm. Great. That's a great resource too, then, for the additional questions, though.
Yes, yes.
All right. Other than transit agencies, have any cities or DOTs been interested in this data, and would they be able to utilize these questions in their own planning or surveys?
Oh, absolutely. I hope they are interested, and I hope they do use it. That was the intent, was to try to reduce the implementation cost of segmentation by providing the golden questions that they can use. And as we did here in Florida, they were an add-on basically to a commuter assistance program evaluation survey we were doing. So I could see transit agencies and TDM agencies using these. And with a tool, it should help on make the analysis easier.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yes, that's definitely a benefit of this tool. I have a couple questions regarding after the survey. Do you have any comments or suggestions for maintaining the results after the campaign ends? And similarly, how do you know if their segment changes the behavior after the survey?
So that's a great question as far as determining what your evaluation approach is going to be, what types of research you have and data you have beforehand to determine whether or not the segmentation approach really is responsible for changing behavior. I would say again that it has a lot to do with what evaluation approach you're going to use. You want to make sure that you have robust data beforehand. Ultimately, if we could do a case control type study that would be, really the best scenario to determine whether or not the segmentation approach has been effective. However, I know that's not always possible, especially in community settings. But if at all possible, maybe implementing a segmentation approach and, trying to compare that to maybe another community that has not had such an approach might be a way of determining whether or not using the segmentation was responsible for that behavior change.
Yeah, and I'd add that several of the it's our understanding that there were several of the European implementations of the program. I think they recalled something like they had each of 7 cities implement at least three different campaigns, and they used a test control structure to try to control for the impacts. And of course, they had a substantial investment in that project because they had so many involved. But yeah, that would be the way to kind of do it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still always, like anything else, if you had the wrong message or the wrong campaign or the wrong outreach, doesn't guarantee success. But we think if you're better able to tailor and approach the people of who they are rather than taking a mass appeal and trying to be all things to all people, you should probably be more successful.
Mm-hmm. Great. Excuse me. And then there were a few questions related to how you reached out to or recruited your participants and the process, I guess, used to conduct the surveys.
Sure. So we used, for this particular research project, we used panel data from Qualtrics. So we looked at a few different panel companies, and Qualtrics, was one that was able to, had enough individuals in their panels in these 3 states to provide us with the number of responses that we needed based on our criteria. So we did purchase the data from Qualtrics, and unfortunately, they do not share what their specific recruitment methods are and how, how they incentivize individuals to take their surveys. But the data was purchased through a panel company, and it was Qualtrics in this case.
And we were on the out. We did a couple things to try to help us understand. We gave them the profile, the demographics, so it didn't come in skewed of whatever, all millennials or all semi-retireds or whatever completing it. And then also, because the questions were structured that you couldn't straight line it, just check 55555 all the way through and mean the same thing, like strongly agree to every single question, because there were some, as you might recall, as I'm not somebody who would whatever bicycle. Not that I like bicycling, I'm not. So someplace maybe the right answer maybe for our perspective might be strongly disagree, not strongly agree. So those that the data that came in that way that looked bogus in both directions, either all in favor or all against, we weeded those out. I don't recall the exact number of the number of data points we lost from that, but it wasn't large.
Well, Qualtrics did exclude quite a bit for us. I think it was close to 1,000 based on their end, though. So we we do have the data for those other people. However, they excluded those people. Other measures they put in place were things like looking at the mean response time to answer the survey, and then they took people that answered the survey too quickly were excluded, things like that. So there were quite a few people, and then people that took it after the quotas were reached were excluded as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how about the recruitment or the outreach to the survey participants? How was that done?
So that was done directly through Qualtrics as well. It's so these individuals are enrolled in their panel. So once we developed the survey and we gave it to Qualtrics, then they handled the recruitment and outreach of the people that are registered in for their panels, and they handled the recruitment of getting the responses.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification. All right, and you had mentioned this and you alluded to this before that, traditionally or often is geographical or by sex or other identifiers, but in these survey questions, do they account for the urban suburban context, or can you speak to that?
Trying to think back as far as
me too.
The questions we did not look at that specifically. However, one of the questions that we did ask was zip code. So that is a great idea for further analysis, is to go back through the participants and then look by zip code and see if we can classify as suburban or urban based on zip code distribution, and then look at differences. I think that's a great next step.
All right, great. Well, thank you again, Phil and Amy, for sharing your work with us today, and thank you everyone for joining us. As I mentioned, we will be sharing the video and the PowerPoint slides in a post-webinar email, and you can also find the research that was discussed today on our website at this link, and also about our upcoming webinars, seminars, and trainings at the nitc.track.pdx.edu events link. So thank you everyone again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.